Russia invades Ukraine, China begins laser warfare, and a suspicious Chinese uniform. And more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Cogni. Dozens of companies you've probably never heard of are tracking you online, and they're collecting your personal data and using it for who knows what. Cogni helps you stop them. I'll explain more at the end. So, 2022, am I right? I mean, this week we just had 02/22/2022 on a Tuesday. We're having fun, aren't we? Then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
Major news. After days on a razor's edge, Ukraine is now a nation at war. Just hours ago, Russian forces began their attack. President Vladimir Putin warning other countries that any attempt to interfere with the Russian action will lead to, quote, consequences they have never seen.
This video from Ukraine's Interior Ministry, and it shows a city on the country's northeastern border. And you can see there what Ukrainian officials say is a column of Russian armor crossing into Ukrainian territory from the north.
As of when I'm recording this, which is Thursday, I don't have much more information. But one thing is clear, China is watching this very closely. So is Taiwan. Even ahead of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen condemned Russia's infringement of Ukraine's sovereignty and said that Taiwan would take steps to bolster their own military readiness and counter cognitive warfare. That's because there's concern China may use the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a distraction to invade Taiwan. Now, China's foreign minister made a point that Taiwan is not Ukraine. He's saying that unlike Ukraine, Taiwan has always been a part of China's territory, so they have even more right to it than Russia has to Ukraine. So not looking too good. State-run Global Times put it a bit more forcefully when they said Taiwan's sovereignty has never existed and threatened to eradicate its secessionist regime. Tell us how you really feel. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party's censorship instructions on covering the Ukraine invasion were leaked, probably accidentally, by Chinese state-run media. Unsurprisingly, the message said no posts unfavorable to Russia or with pro-Western content should be published. And here's the kicker. A senior editor at Xinhua news agency posted that China has to back Russia up with emotional and moral support while refraining from treading on the toes of the United States and the European Union. Because in the future, China will also need Russia's understanding and support when wrestling with America to solve the Taiwan issue once and for all. Oh my gosh, you know what this means, right? It's time to triple your investment in China. Buy, buy, buy! It really isn't a mystery how the West got ourselves in this mess. The Chinese Communist Party wants Taiwan. Constant incursions by the Chinese military have made Communist China's intentions abundantly clear. How the U.S. handles the situation with Ukraine will affect what the party does on Taiwan. Unfortunately, the U.S. already sent a bad message with the incredibly botched pullout of Afghanistan. Fall of Saigon 2.0. Chinese state-run media had a field day with that, specifically linking it to Taiwan. My favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, said it was a lesson for Taiwan. They wrote the situation in Afghanistan suddenly saw a radical change after the country was abandoned by the U.S., and Washington just left despite the worsening situation in Kabul. Is this some kind of omen of Taiwan's future fate? From what happened in Afghanistan, Taiwan should perceive that once a war breaks out in the Straits, the island's defense will collapse in hours and the U.S. military won't come to help. As a result, Taiwan's authorities will quickly surrender, while some high-level officials may flee by plane. As I talked about in a recent episode, there is a chance China will invade Taiwan this year. I'll put a link to that below. But while these are dark times, remember, warfare of the 21st century will have a different type of soldier. Internet warriors and memers. That's a lesson we can take from the official Twitter account of Ukraine. They responded to the Russian invasion with this. Memes are just political cartoons and will have a place in future history books. Or future history cave paintings, depending on whether we end up getting nuked back to the Stone Age. And coming up after the break, China is shooting lasers at Australia's Air Force. Welcome back. This week, the Chinese Communist Party's military fired lasers at an Australian aircraft.
Fired from the deck of this Chinese destroyer, the military-grade laser lit up the Australian surveillance aircraft flying overhead.
I can see it no other way than an act of intimidation.
One that not only had the potential to blind the pilot, but also disable sensitive equipment on board, putting the lives of up to 10 crew in danger.
Hey, whatever happened to China's peaceful development? Now you might be thinking, well, hey, China's just defending itself. What was Australia doing flying a surveillance aircraft over the Chinese mainland? Nope. The Chinese naval vessel was within Australia's exclusive economic zone. Nevertheless, China's foreign ministry says China had every right to be there. A spokesman said the Chinese vessel sailing in the high seas complies with relevant international law and international practice and is fully legitimate and legal. Hey, remember how the Chinese Communist Party gradually began expanding its control of the South China Sea? And remember how the Chinese Communist Party gradually began expanding its control over the India-China border? Well, now they're getting all the way down to Australia. And this isn't the first time the People's Liberation Army has used lasers. In 2019, Australian Navy helicopter pilots were hit by lasers while exercising in the South China Sea at night. And in 2018, they did it to U.S. pilots in Africa. The PLA should really leave lasers where they belong, in photos from the 90s. The Beijing Olympics are finally over, but the Olympic controversies are not. At the Olympics, Taiwanese athletes are forced to compete under the moniker Chinese Taipei. So people were especially upset when Taiwanese speed skater Huang Yuding posted these photos of herself on social media a few weeks ago, training in what looks like a Team China uniform. After Taiwanese citizens criticized her for sporting the uniform of a country that constantly threatens to annex Taiwan by force if necessary, she took down the footage but defended her actions by stating that sports did not take nationality into account. But the Chinese Communist Party sure does. Ironically, she was also the Taiwanese flag bearer during the opening ceremonies. Sorry, the Chinese Taipei flag bearer, because Taiwan isn't allowed to use their country flag either. Now, Taiwan's premier has ordered a probe into why Huang was wearing the Chinese uniform. I'm sure she has a good explanation, like maybe her dog ate her other uniform. U.S. figure skater Vincent Zhou was banned from the Olympics closing ceremony. Why? Because apparently he got flagged as a COVID close contact risk. Zhou competed in the figure skating team event earlier in the Olympics, but then he tested positive for COVID on February 7th and had to drop out of the rest of the competition and stay in isolation for 9 days. Even though he was out of quarantine, Zhou was not allowed to march outside during the closing ceremony while double masked, despite him now testing negative for COVID not once, not twice, but 14 times in a row. Somehow I feel like that's a fitting end to the Olympics. The Olympics may be over, but there's still plenty of time for the CCP to completely blow our minds. And not just with the Paralympics next month. That's why you should celebrate with our exclusive t-shirt, Beijing 2022, Fake Snow, Real Genocide. Get yours now, because after the Paralympics are over on March 13th, that shirt will be gone forever. Buy one now over at ChinaUncensored.tv/merchandise. And after the break, guess which dictatorship is using new Chinese weapons? Welcome back. In a taste of what's to come if the Chinese Communist Party rises to global dominance, China has sanctioned 2 U.S. arms suppliers over sales to Taiwan. Last year, China passed the Anti-Foreign Sanctions Law, which lets it sanction foreign countries. Look, don't ask questions. The sanctions were in response to a $100 million deal approved by the U.S. for maintenance of Taiwan's missile defense systems by the 2 companies. Now, it's a little unclear what these sanctions will actually do. In fact, both companies have been sanctioned before by China. Right now, those sanctions don't really affect them. But the Communist Party is working towards the day when they can levy real sanctions with teeth against any company or country that crosses it. So by all means, let's give them more money and power. China has handled the coronavirus with an insanely strict zero-COVID policy. And that means Hong Kong has been swept up in it as well. Hong Kong has just ordered mandatory COVID tests for all residents. The population of 7.5 million will be tested 3 times in March. Not only that, but the ban on eating at restaurants past 6 p.m. will be extended to April 20th. Because science. You may remember last year, the military junta in Myanmar seized power. Well, now they're holding on to that power using new weapons from Russia and China. The weapons were sold with full knowledge that they would be used to attack civilians. If only Western democracies could stick together the way authoritarian leaders do. And the Chinese Communist Party has been waging a trade war against Lithuania. That's over Lithuania's support for Taiwan. But guess what? Lithuania's exports hit a 10-year high. So nuts to you, CCP. International solidarity and a $1 billion credit line offered by Taiwan definitely helped. You know what also helped? China only made up 1% of Lithuania's exports. Lithuania was smart. They didn't do big business with a psychotic authoritarian regime that might launch a trade war on them someday. That's a good lesson for the rest of the world. And this episode was sponsored by Incogni. Every time you go online, there are companies trying to track your personal data. Your name, your email, your home address, your social security number, your employment history, all sorts of things. These private companies are buying it, selling it, and doing who knows what with your data. When I signed up for Incogni, I discovered there were 76 data brokers that potentially had my private information. It's crazy. I'd never heard of most of these companies. But they definitely heard of me. You ever sign up for a free newsletter and then start getting tons of spam from third-party companies? I have. And even if you try to be careful, you're not safe. For example, in 2018, the Marriott Starwood program and credit card were hacked, exposing data on 500 million people. If Marriott had gotten your name and phone number somehow, it could have been in that breach. The good news is you have a right to force these companies to delete your private data. The bad news is it requires you to identify the specific laws that give you this power and then write individual takedown letters to each of them. That's where Incogni comes in. They have an experienced team that knows exactly how to communicate with these companies and get your data removed. They automate this process for you. So check out Incogni using the link below. The first 100 people to use the code UNCENSORED will get 20% off. So protect your privacy. Go to incogni.com/uncensored and use the code UNCENSORED to get your personal data off the market. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.